Today we cast our eyes over the rise of authoritarianism and fascism, and how the silver screen responds to the imposition of ideas on an industry that was built to create and explore thought without boundaries. Authoritarianism is the magician that never stops performing, their popularity ebbing and flowing with the frustrations of the town they entertain. But the impression they leave behind is what concerns us most. Half the audience watch on and hope that the rabbit that's been pulled from the hat had enough room to breathe whilst in its secret compartment, whereas the other half are thinking about all the hats they have at home and how they too could emulate the feat and become kings of an empire of rabbits within weeks. Unfortunately, both halves get a vote when it comes to elections, and when the magician tells them he can solve all their problems with a couple of waves of his wand, the half that have recently gone bankrupt after the failure of their rabbit business give the magician another chance. But once our glorious leader is in place, the real tricks begin, usually making anything that may oppose them disappear. And the arts are almost always one of the first targets in sight. Cinema has a choice to make during this slow and gradual process. They can try to warn us all what's coming, or pander to and support the message in the hope they'll be given a hefty reward when control is total. Although modern fascism has learned that there's money to be made at both ends of the argument, and social media welcomes it all into the debate, whilst lifting the increasingly valuable personal data from our pockets upon entry. Movies give us the freedom to create imagined realities, and the simplest and most popular way to sound the alarm is to build a world where the future we fear is already the norm. The next step is to introduce our hero, going about their day in seeming compliance and servitude, displaying minor rebellions as concerned friends warn them of the dangers of stepping out of line. They don't listen and venture on a journey that brings about the collapse of the entire system, rather than the more common reality of ending up in a dungeon, hoping your next beating goes too far and puts an end to your misery. Anyway, let's lighten the mood and introduce our first film. The daddy of dystopia, so ingrained into our culture that we understand implicitly what the mention of its title, or Big Brother, means. Orwell dumps us into his vision of society as a fully formed and maintained system, but fascism's greatest weapon is the slow yet continual slide towards the unthinkable, becoming the everyday. 1984 makes us alert to the shadows of authoritarianism that loom over our lives. But once the dear leader tells their followers that it's just the loony left overreacting to a silly film, they dismiss the blindingly obvious as nothing but a passing darkness that shouldn't be feared. Fear it a lot. Brazil takes us behind the scenes of a fascist regime and shows how the processing of evil is actually quite mundane. Rather than hanging people on spikes whilst they're whipped by ogres wearing high heels, you're more likely to find you can no longer buy milk because your dairy privileges have been revoked. Terry Gilliam's emotionally cold world provides the perfect backdrop to the topic, whilst the normality of everything that occurs has you wondering if we already live in his future. The Handmaid's Tale was once a ropey film from the 90s that made you pause before getting on with your day, but the more up-to-date TV series has captured the minds of a generation and alerted them to the prospect of a state that chokes you so slowly you feel perfectly fine right up to your final breath. Religion is the weapon of choice, and women are the designated target. In the modern era, it's become a beacon for the female population to assert its push for the outlandish desires to be treated as equals, but those that watch on and feel complacent about the rights they already have, and are confident they would never be targeted, are exactly the minds that fascists rely on to impose their will. By the time we reach our dystopian goal, it's usually locked in for at least a generation, so Hollywood tries to show us how easily we can gently slide into servitude. I imagine in an effort to shake us awake. However, the usual response is to tell everybody on social media that you've just watched a great film and can't wait for the sequel, lol. Cabaret is set in Berlin in the 1930s, focusing on a club of social decadence that believes the walls will shield it from the growing Nazi movement outside. The problem with authoritarian regimes is that they really want everybody to be on the same page, or dead in the gutter, which is a very convincing argument to turn immediately to the page you've been told to. Which means there will be no social oases allowed, and the walls that were supposed to shield them are slowly removed brick by brick, until everybody realises they're actually outside and have just shot their next door neighbour for not saluting the Führer. American History X is a gloriously horrific piece of cinema. Focusing on an individual indoctrinated into a group of white supremacists, it follows his release from prison and his attempt to step away from those that had become his family. Flashbacks are used exquisitely to show his gradual fall into the regime, as he goes from mildly frustrated youth to a furious and violent preacher of their beliefs. The scale of the film may be smaller, but society is a collection of individuals, and if a sadistic lunatic can seduce enough of them to share their chosen enemy, countries can easily fall. Mississippi Burning is another masterpiece that focuses on a small town rather than a country, but demonstrates how having the right people in the right positions of authority can weaponise any shared ideology. Democracy and its fractured nature of power is supposed to protect us against such things, but nobody seems to consider somebody coming in and placing stooges in enough places to wield power without question. If only Gene Hackman was still alive, I'd give him 20 quid and ask him to visit the White House. What we must remember is that cinema is a reflection of whoever stands in front of it, a fact more than understood by the savviest of megalomaniacs, and when they scream a lie into society's mirror, it can shine just as brightly as the work intended to counter it, sometimes more so. Perhaps the most iconic example of just making things up to get your own way is Reefer Madness. Funded by a church group, it was intended to scare the youth away from marijuana, and showed innocent grade A students taking a single puff of a joint before becoming instant lunatics. The most infamous reaction to the mild hallucinogen being to jump in a car and drive off a cliff while cackling manically to himself. The irony is that it was so bad and so ludicrously inaccurate. Its true success came in the 1970s as a favourite accompaniment to getting as high as possible on the college campuses of America. However, not every attempt to sway opinion is as blatant. Ask yourself why every bad guy in the 80s in Hollywood was Russian, morphing into Middle Eastern terrorists sometime around the First Gulf War igniting. Unfortunately, we now have a fascist with the critical thinking power of a peanut, in charge of the biggest stockpile weapons in the world, who thinks Rambo was a documentary and Fox News is the only true source of information. This stuff really works. Today, it's companies that hold power comparable to many nations, and they're far savvier than any politician. Even the ones who actually understand how the world works, and don't think just shouting things out loud and repeatedly is the same as achieving them. Why would these corporate behemoths cut off profit from half the population by only pandering to the easily convinced, when they can allow writers and directors to take swipes at them and double the audience? Because somehow we feel that if somebody's saying this stuff out loud, why can't everybody hear it? Let us show you what we mean. Consider Disney and the Jimmy Kimmel affair. Disney produces Andor, the tale of a simple man. Andor, our good guy, living under an authoritarian regime, the bad guy. So they're on our side, right? They can see how this evil permeates through the art society and makes everybody sad. Look, they've made a programme about standing up against it. Well, when Jimmy Kimmel poked fun at Donald Trump, the ginger toddler got angry and screamed and shouted until Disney did his bidding and closed down the show that they also produce. It was quickly reinstated as people began cancelling their Disney subscriptions, and Disney's true master, money, pulled rank. But the point is, they can openly show us the dangers and sinister intent of such power, allowing us to believe that they too would wish to save us all from such a thing. But when it came to it, they folded on the side of the regime without a hint that the hero might be them. So what have we learned? Well, if you're watching this in America, maybe you're starting to wonder about that next election and whether Trump will just start a frivolous war and then claim you can't have elections whilst in conflict, or until at least 3 generations of his dynasty have all ruled. But what about cinema? It can warn us what's coming, it can show us how it will play out, it can give us the answers to stopping it before it gains real power and momentum, but it can also distract us, encourage us to believe in the righteous one, convince us we don't need to worry about politics because another season of I'm hot but my life is also awkward even though my job is a token gesture because I have so much free time to get into mundane daily adventures is due out in March. Listen to the message but heed the messenger. Ask who profits. Ask yourself how you'd feel if the noose was closing in on your community, race, or gender. Ask how you'd feel if somebody you disagreed with used the same power your overlord is on you. Open your eyes, take a deep breath, and hope enough of your fellow citizens are doing the same. Or at least enough of them to keep the very worst humans ever seizing power again.